In the Wyoming Badlands of 1892, Cole Remington was a dead man walking. His heart was buried 6 feet under with his wife Sarah, and had been for 3 long, silent years. All that was left of him was granite and grief, a man hollowed out by loss. His only reason for drawing breath was his son, Eli, a small, 8-year-old boy who saw the world through a different kind of window. The folks in Cedar Falls had their own words for it. They'd whisper that the boy was touched, broken, not quite right. Cole saw their stares in the general store, heard their hushed tones in the church pews. The whispers followed him like a shadow, a constant reminder that his son didn't fit into their world, that they didn't fit. So Cole had built a fortress around them. Thousands of acres of prime ranch land, a kingdom of solitude where his son's gentle spirit and peculiar habits wouldn't be judged. Eli's need for order, his silent rituals, the way he'd line up his tin soldiers with mathematical precision. Out here, those weren't signs of being broken. They were just Eli. Then she arrived. She stepped off the noon stage from Boston with a single worn suitcase and a past she kept locked tight behind her green eyes. Her name was Mabel Quinn, and she was hired to be their maid. But she was more than that. So much more. She possessed something Cole thought had vanished from the earth, the ability to see the man behind the stone and the boy behind the silence. Where others saw Eli's strangeness, Mabel saw his gifts. Where they saw a problem to be fixed, she saw a soul to be understood. One night, a thunderstorm cracked the sky open, the kind of violent squall that sent Eli into a spiral of terror. Cole found Mabel not hiding, not flinching, but sitting on the floor with his son. Her voice was a soft, steady current in the roaring river of thunder, calming his fears with a patience Cole hadn't seen in years. In that moment, watching this stranger from the east treat his boy with such profound tenderness, a flicker of warmth sparked in the cold, dead ashes of Cole's chest. It was a feeling so foreign, so dangerous, he almost crushed it. Because Mabel Quinn didn't just bring a suitcase. She brought secrets. Secrets that would collide with his own sorrows, with the town's cruel gossip, and with a darkness lurking just over the hills, a darkness that wanted her and would stop at nothing to possess what she had. This fragile chance at healing? It was about to be put to the test, and the storm that was coming would make that night's thunder sound like a whisper. The Wyoming morning was a masterpiece of gray and silver. Mist clung to the hills where Cole's cattle grazed, fat and content. The Remington ranch house stood against the endless wilderness like a promise and a warning. It was a 2-story fortress of weathered timber and stone, its porch overlooking an empire built on sweat and blood. Cole emerged from the barn, the scent of hay and horses clinging to him. He pulled on his leather gloves, his hands scarred from a life of hard work. 3 years a widower had carved new lines into his face, turning his once easy smile into a permanent, grim line. He was a man who knew life took more than it ever gave. He looked up. On the 2nd floor, a window was open. Eli was there, his small face soft and unmarked by the world's harshness. His hair was the same shade of spun gold as his mother's, a painful, beautiful reminder of everything Cole had lost. The boy watched his father with an unnerving intensity, his brown eyes seeing things Cole couldn't. "Morning, son," Cole called up. His voice was rough as rock with his ranch hands, but for Eli it was always a little softer. Eli didn't answer with words. He rarely did. Instead, he raised a small hand, his fingers moving in a precise, silent wave. It was a language they had developed over 3 years of shared grief, a language that said more than words ever could. Cole nodded. He understood. Hank Morrison, the ranch foreman, approached. He was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same timber as the barn, loyal to the Remingtons for 40 years. His face was a roadmap of Wyoming seasons. "Boss," he said, tipping his hat. "Got word from town. The new girl's on the noon stage. Mabel Quinn, from Boston." Cole's jaw tightened. Hiring help had been Hank's idea, gently pushed by Mrs. Crawford, the kindest widow in town and one of the few who treated Eli like a person. Cole had fought it for months. Eli was his responsibility, but the ranch was a demanding beast, and his own stubbornness was wearing thin. Boston, Cole repeated. The word tasted foreign, like trouble. What's a Boston girl want out here? Fresh start, I reckon, Hank said, a knowing look in his eyes. Same as most folks. Through the window above, Eli had started his morning ritual. He was arranging his tin soldiers on the windowsill. The same ritual, every single day since Sarah's death. Each tiny figure had to be placed exactly 2 inches apart. Their rifles had to be angled at a perfect 45 degrees. It was a mystery to the town, but to Cole it was a comfort, an anchor of order in his son's chaotic world. Those soldiers had been Cole's as a boy, a gift from his own father. Now they served a new purpose. They stood guard over Eli's fragile peace. Cole knew better than to disturb them. He knew not to suggest a different game. This wasn't a game. This was survival. She have experience with children? Cole asked, though he knew the answer wouldn't matter. No one had experience with a child like Eli. Letter said she cared for younger siblings. Lost her family to the fever last winter, Hank explained. She's just looking for a place to belong. The words hung in the crisp air. A place to belong. Cole knew that feeling. He knew the desperate ache of loss, the need to build something new from the wreckage. Maybe that's why he gave a reluctant, almost imperceptible nod. Let her come. What more could he possibly have to lose? The kitchen was the ghost of a happy life. It had once been Sarah's kingdom, filled with the scent of baking bread and the sound of her humming old hymns. Her laughter used to bounce off these walls, filling every corner. Now the silence was a physical weight, a constant pressure on Cole's chest. He and Eli ate their breakfast in that silence. The only sounds were the clink of silverware on porcelain. Eli ate in his usual way, arranging his bacon and eggs into careful patterns that only made sense to him. He was lost in a world of his own, a world Cole desperately wished he could enter. It was Mrs. Crawford who had finally broken through Cole's defenses. She had been Sarah's best friend, a woman of deep faith and practical wisdom. That boy needs a woman's touch, Cole, she'd insisted on her last visit. Not to replace his mother, Lord knows no one could, but to show him there's still gentleness left in this world. Cole had hated the idea at first. Eli was his to protect, his. But the silence in the boy was getting deeper. The space between them was growing wider. Maybe Mrs. Crawford was right. Maybe they both needed something more than just survival. The town of Cedar Falls was 10 miles away, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled against the wind. It was a place of decent, hard-working people. But small towns have small minds, and Eli's differences made him a target. Children would point when he rocked back and forth to soothe himself. They'd stare when he covered his ears against the loud clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Their parents would shush them, but the damage was always done. Another cut. Another reminder that they didn't belong. So Cole kept them on the ranch. Here, in the wide open spaces, Eli wasn't strange. His quiet nature was a gift. His attention to detail was an asset. Here, he could just be. The noon stage arrived right on time, kicking up a cloud of dust. A slight figure in a dark traveling dress stepped out. She clutched a worn leather satchel like a lifeline, her eyes scanning the vast, intimidating ranch with a guarded alertness. Mabel Quinn. She looked younger than her 24 years, with rich auburn hair pinned neatly under a simple bonnet. Her green eyes seemed to see everything, but reveal nothing. Cole walked down the porch steps, his boots loud on the wooden planks. Miss Quinn, I presume. Mr. Remington. Her voice was crisp, educated Boston, but underneath there was a softness, a weariness. Welcome to Wyoming. The words felt stiff in his own mouth. He hadn't used such formal courtesies in years. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult. It was manageable, thank you. Her gaze went to the house, and her fingers tightened on her satchel. She was nervous. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Remington. I understand you have a son." The question hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. How do you explain Eli to a stranger? "Eli is 8, he said carefully. "He's a good boy, but he can be particular about his routines. Some folks don't understand his ways." Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. "Children often know things we adults have forgotten," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Perhaps his ways make more sense than we realize." Before Cole could process this stunningly insightful reply, Eli himself appeared. He stood in the doorway, a small silhouette against the dark interior of the house. He was clutching his tin soldiers in one hand, a break from routine that told Cole the boy was anxious. Mabel saw him instantly, but she didn't stare, she didn't point. She simply gave a slight, respectful nod, the way you'd greet a shy fawn you didn't want to spook. Eli's eyes widened. He didn't run. "Perhaps you'd like to see the house," Cole said, a part of him wanting to send her right back on that stagecoach. Change was dangerous. Life had taught him that surprises were usually cruel. The house told a story of a life interrupted. Sarah's piano in the parlor was coated in a fine layer of dust. The fireplace in the kitchen held cold ashes. "Mrs. Crawford has been helping out," Cole explained, the words an admission of his own failure. He couldn't tell this stranger about the mornings Eli wouldn't eat because his fork was in the wrong place, or the nights he'd wake up screaming at a shadow on the wall. He couldn't explain the crushing weight of knowing his love wasn't enough. Mabel ran a finger along the dusty kitchen table. She wasn't judging. She was assessing. "A house should feel like a home," she said softly. "Perhaps between the two of us, we can help it remember how." As the day wore on, Cole watched her. She moved with a quiet grace, respecting Eli's space, never pushing, never demanding. When Eli began his evening ritual of checking every latch on every window and door, a habit he'd started after his mother died, Mabel simply went about her work, her acceptance a silent, powerful statement. Later, as he served their simple supper, the gold wedding band on Cole's hand caught the lamplight. 11 years he'd worn it, first with joy, then with grief. Taking it off felt like a betrayal to Sarah, but tonight, for the first time, it felt less like an anchor and more like a chain. That night, lying in his cold, empty bed, a question burned in Cole's mind. Did he have the courage to truly live again? Or was he doomed to be a prisoner of his own sorrow, a ghost in his own home? Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods. It was the same wind that had brought Sarah here, full of dreams. But tonight, it whispered of something new. A second chance, a delicate, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken little family could learn to heal. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the answer to that question lay with the quiet woman sleeping in the small room under the eaves. The woman with the sad green eyes and the secrets locked away in her heart. Mabel had been at the ranch for 1 week when she found the music box. She'd asked to clean the attic, a practical suggestion to clear the dust that settled through the floorboards. Cole had hesitated. That attic was a tomb of memories, a place he hadn't entered since Sarah's funeral. But he agreed. It needed to be done. He should have warned her. He should have told her about the music box. It was a delicate thing, a porcelain ballerina pirouetting to the crystalline notes of Amazing Grace. It had been Sarah's most treasured possession, a gift from her grandmother. Cole had wrapped it in Sarah's wedding dress and tucked it away, unable to bear its sweet, heartbreaking melody. The first warning was Mabel's sharp cry of delight from the attic. The second was the sound of her excited footsteps on the ladder, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment she wound the key. The familiar tune drifted down into the quiet house, and Eli shattered. He'd been at the kitchen table, lost in the silent, orderly world of his tin soldiers. The first notes reached him, and his small body went rigid. His brown eyes flew wide with a terror that ripped through Cole's soul. The soldiers scattered across the floor as Eli's hands slammed against his ears. A keening wail tore from his throat, a sound of pure, undiluted grief that hadn't been heard in that house for 3 years. "No! No! No!" he screamed, his voice breaking. He began to rock violently, a full-blown meltdown, the kind Cole hadn't seen since the dark, early days of their loss. Cole lunged for his son, his own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The music box played on, relentless. "It's all right, Eli! Papa's here!" But his words were useless, swallowed by the storm of his son's pain. Mabel appeared at the bottom of the ladder, the music box in her hands, her face a mask of horror. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know. I should have asked." "Just make it stop," Cole gritted out, his anger a hot, useless thing. It wasn't her fault. The enemy was grief itself, ambushing them with a forgotten song. But as Mabel moved to silence the box, she did something that stunned him. She didn't run. She didn't freeze. She set the music box gently on the counter and walked toward the storm. She sat on the floor near Eli, her skirts pooling around her, a small island of calm in the chaos. "Eli," she said, her voice incredibly soft. "I know you remember that song. I know it hurts to hear it." The boy's wailing faltered, just for a second. His rocking continued, but it was a fraction less violent. Cole watched, frozen, as this stranger seemed to instinctively understand what he, in 3 years, had failed to grasp. This wasn't a tantrum. This was heartbreak. "Your mama loved that music box, didn't she?" Mabel whispered. "I found it wrapped in her wedding dress, tucked away like something very, very precious." Eli's eyes, wild with pain, peeked through his fingers. The rocking slowed. "Sometimes, when we miss someone very much," Mabel continued, her voice a balm on a raw wound, "the things that remind us of them can hurt. But that doesn't mean the love was wrong. It just means our hearts are very, very full." A knot formed in Cole's own throat. This woman, this stranger, was reaching his son in a way no one else could. She wasn't trying to fix him. She was honoring his pain. Slowly, Eli lowered his hands. His face was blotchy and tear-streaked, but the panic was gone from his eyes. He looked at Mabel with a dawning curiosity. "The music box belonged to your mama when she was a little girl," Mabel told him. "It's not trying to make you sad. It's trying to remember something beautiful." Eli's gaze shifted to the music box on the counter. The kitchen held its breath. Then, with the same careful precision he used for his soldiers, the boy stood up and walked to it. His small fingers traced the porcelain dancer with a reverence that shattered what was left of Cole's heart. Mama used to wind it when I couldn't sleep," he whispered. They were the first words he had spoken about his mother since the funeral. "Would you like me to put it back in the attic?" Mabel asked gently. "Or would you like to keep it? Somewhere you can see it when you're ready." The question was a bridge between the suffocating past and a possible future. Cole held his breath. "Can it stay in my room?" Eli asked, his voice barely audible. "I think maybe Mama would like to be close by." The simple request cracked the wall Cole had built around his own grief. For 3 years, he'd avoided any mention of Sarah, thinking he was protecting his son. But this woman from Boston, in a matter of minutes, had shown him that acknowledging pain was the only way to heal it. Later that evening, after Mabel had helped Eli find the perfect spot for the music box on his dresser, Cole found her in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "I don't know how you knew." "I lost someone too," Mabel said simply, her eyes holding a deep, ancient sorrow. "Not a mother, but someone precious. I learned that pretending the grief isn't there doesn't make it go away. It just makes it fester in the dark." Her words hinted at a story, a pain he wanted to understand, but the day had held enough revelations. He just nodded, his gratitude a vast, unspoken thing. That night, lying in his lonely bed, Cole could hear the faint, sweet melody of Amazing Grace playing softly from his son's room. Something had shifted. Mabel Quinn had done more than clean their attic. She had unlocked a door he'd kept bolted for 3 years. And through that door, along with the pain of memory, came the terrifying, brilliant light of hope. The question that haunted him as he fell asleep was whether he had the courage to step into that light, or if he would retreat back into the familiar shadows of his grief. The next morning, for the first time in months, Eli smiled. Mabel found him in his room, sitting before the open, silent music box, just watching the little porcelain dancer. "She's pretty," he whispered. "Mama said she was dancing to heaven." From that day on, a new rhythm took hold of the ranch. Mabel started inviting Eli to help with chores, never pushing, always praising. She taught him how to collect eggs from the hens with slow, gentle hands. She showed him how to brush the horses with long, calming strokes. She even taught him to bottle feed an orphaned calf, a task that required a nurturing patience Eli seemed to possess in spades. "Animals know when someone has a gentle heart," she told him, as the calf suckled greedily. "They can sense kindness." Cole found himself watching them, drawn to the quiet murmur of his son's questions and Mabel's thoughtful answers. He was seeing his son blossom under her care, and it filled him with a confusing mixture of gratitude and a raw, sharp longing he refused to name. It was during one of these quiet moments that the devil rode in. Jeremiah Blackwood. His ranch bordered Cole's to the east, and he cut an imposing figure on his powerful black stallion. He was handsome in a predatory way, with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. And when those eyes landed on Mabel, Cole's hand instinctively twitched, as if reaching for a gun he no longer wore. "Cole!" Blackwood called out, dismounting with an arrogant grace. "Heard you hired some help, all the way from Boston." "Word travels fast," Cole replied, stepping out of the barn to meet him. He positioned himself slightly, keeping Mabel and Eli in his line of sight. "Small territory." Blackwood's eyes slid past Cole, fixing on Mabel. "Mind if I introduce myself to the lady?" Ranch politics demanded courtesy, even when you wanted to put your fist through the man's teeth. Cole reluctantly led him toward the pasture fence, where Mabel stood with a protective hand on Eli's shoulder. The boy instinctively shrank behind her skirts. "Miss Quinn, this is Jeremiah Blackwood," Cole said. "A pleasure, Miss Quinn," Blackwood said, his smile all charm and calculation. His eyes raked over her, taking in her simple dress, her neatly pinned hair. "I trust Wyoming isn't too rustic for a refined lady from the East." "I'm finding it's exactly what I need, Mr. Blackwood," Mabel replied, her tone polite but cool. "Mr. Remington and Eli have made me feel very welcome." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Eli. "And this must be the famous son. He's gotten big." He said it with a faint sneer that made Cole's blood run cold. "Eli has been teaching me about the animals," Mabel said smoothly, redirecting the man's venom. "He has a real gift with them." "That's so?" Blackwood's tone dripped with disbelief. "Well, I suppose animals are easier to manage than people." The casual cruelty hit its mark. Cole saw Eli flinch. Before he could step in, Mabel's voice cut through the air, quiet as steel. "I've found that those who are gentle with creatures weaker than themselves often possess the strongest character, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "It takes real courage to be kind." The rebuke was so perfectly polite, so expertly delivered, that Blackwood was left speechless for a moment. A flash of raw anger crossed his face before he masked it with his charming smile. He was a man used to getting what he wanted. This quiet, dignified woman was a challenge, and Jeremiah Blackwood loved a challenge. "Well said, Miss Quinn," he purred. "Perhaps you'd do me the honor of accompanying me to the church social on Sunday." "That's very kind," Mabel said, her refusal gentle but absolute. "But my duties here keep me quite busy. I'm sure you understand." Blackwood did not understand. His smile tightened. He promised to call again soon, a promise that sounded more like a threat. That night at supper, Eli spoke up, his voice small but clear. "I didn't like that man." "Why not, sweet boy?" Mabel asked. Eli considered it with his usual seriousness. His eyes were mean, he said, like the bull that hurt Tommy Baker last summer. The observation was so chillingly accurate that Cole almost choked on his coffee, out of the mouths of babes. Later, after Eli was in bed, Mabel lingered in the kitchen, her movements tense. "He'll be back," Cole said, stating the obvious. "I know." She folded a dishcloth with precise, sharp movements. Men like him don't take no for an answer. "You sound like you speak from experience." She was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked at him, her green eyes were shadowed with old pain. "I had a situation back in Boston," she said, her voice low. "A man who thought his wealth entitled him to anything he wanted. It's part of the reason I came west." Her eyes held his. Sometimes, distance is the only safety. The confession explained so much. Her guardedness, her quiet strength, the way she had recognized Blackwood's brand of poison instantly. And it ignited a fiercely protective instinct in Cole, something that went far beyond his duty as her employer. "You're safe here," he said, the words of vow. She reached for the worn, leather-bound Bible she always kept near, her fingers tracing the cover. "My faith tells me that everything happens for a purpose," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Maybe I was meant to be here, to help Eli, to help—" She stopped herself, but the unspoken words hung in the air between them. "To help you." The possibility was a terrifying, exhilarating thing. Healing meant letting go of the grief that had become his identity. It meant feeling again. And Cole Remington wasn't sure he was strong enough for that. As Mabel retreated to her room, she left her Bible on the table. Cole picked it up. Tucked between the pages were pressed flowers, fragile ghosts of a life left behind. They spoke of love and loss, of a faith that had been tested by fire. For the first time in 3 years, Cole found himself praying. Not for an end to his pain, but for the courage to face what came next. Because Jeremiah Blackwood was a storm on the horizon, and that storm was heading straight for them. The revelation of Eli's gift came on a quiet afternoon by the creek. It started with a piece of burnt charcoal from the fireplace and a smooth sheet of birch bark. Mabel found him there, completely absorbed, his small fingers moving the charcoal with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She expected to see a child's scribbles. What she saw stole her breath. It was a horse, not just a drawing of a horse, but the spirit of one. Every line was perfect, capturing the powerful muscles, the intelligent eye, the gentle curve of the neck. The mane seemed to flow, as if caught in a prairie wind. It was more than a drawing, it was a memory brought to life. And Mabel recognized the horse. It was Moonbeam, Sarah's favorite mare, a gentle gray who had been retired to pasture after her mistress's death. "Eli," Mabel whispered, kneeling beside him, This is beautiful. How did you learn to do this?" He looked up, his brown eyes clear and serious. "I just see her in my head," he said simply. "Mama used to ride her every morning. They looked happy." The drawing was a key, unlocking a door into Eli's hidden world. It showed a depth of observation, an emotional intelligence that no one had ever suspected. The boy who couldn't make small talk, who couldn't meet a stranger's eye, could capture the very soul of an animal on a piece of bark. He wasn't broken. He was brilliant. Mabel raced back to the house, holding the drawing like a sacred artifact. "Cole, you have to see this." Cole saw the bark and fell silent. He stared, stunned, at the image of his wife's horse, captured perfectly through the eyes of the son he thought was lost in his own world. "Eli drew this? He says he sees her in his head," Mabel explained, her voice trembling with excitement. "The way she looked when Sarah rode her." The words were a punch to the gut. For 3 years, Cole had focused on what Eli had lost. He never once considered what his son might have gained, a unique, powerful way of seeing, of remembering, of holding on to the beauty in the world. His son wasn't expressing himself with words. He was expressing himself in a language far more profound. That night, Cole found Eli in his room, already working on another drawing. This time, it was the orphaned calf, every detail perfect, from the curl of its eyelashes to the soft texture of its coat. "These are incredible, son." Eli glanced up. "I like to remember things exactly as they are," he said. "When I draw them, I can keep them safe." The simple explanation was a revelation. Eli's rituals, his need for order, it was all a way of making the world safe, of holding on to the things he loved. It wasn't a disorder, it was a superpower. Word of Eli's talent spread, thanks to a proud Mrs. Crawford. Soon, other children from town were asking to see his drawings. For the first time, Eli was the object of admiration, not pity. He started to stand a little taller. He started to speak a little more. Mabel hadn't just given him charcoal, she had given him a voice. "Papa," Eli said one evening as he and Mabel sat on the porch. Cole had just come in from the barn. "Mabel says maybe I could draw your picture sometime." The innocent request pierced Cole's armor. When was the last time anyone had wanted to capture his image? When was the last time he'd felt worthy of being seen? "I'd be honored, son," he managed, his throat tight. The evenings on the porch became a new ritual, the three of them, talking quietly as the sun went down. Mabel had a way of asking questions that unlocked Eli's heart. "What do you miss most about your mama?" she asked him one afternoon. Eli was quiet for a long time. "The way she hummed when she cooked," he finally said. "The house felt different when she was happy." "And what made her happiest?" "When Papa would come in from the fields and kiss her cheek," he said. "She'd get all pink and smiley, like she had a secret." The memory, so vivid, so pure, struck Cole with the force of a physical blow. He had forgotten those simple moments. Mabel's presence was excavating his past, bringing both the pain and the beauty back into the light. "Do you think she'd be proud of my drawings?" Eli asked Mabel, his voice small. "I think she would be amazed," Mabel said, her voice full of conviction. "And I think she'd be so proud of the kind, gentle boy you are." That night, after Eli was asleep, Cole and Mabel sat on the porch in the gathering dusk. "You've given him something I couldn't," Cole admitted, the words tasting like rust and relief. "You helped him find his voice." "He always had it," Mabel said softly. "He just needed someone to listen to his language." "And what about you, Mabel?" The question escaped him before he could stop it. "What do you need?" She was silent for so long he thought he'd crossed a line. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I need to believe," she said, "that the broken pieces of a life can be put back together into something beautiful, that our sorrows aren't wasted." The raw honesty of her words demanded the same from him. "I need to stop being afraid," he confessed into the darkness. "Of living, of feeling." The admission hung between them, a fragile bridge built of shared truths. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They were two wounded souls, standing on opposite sides of a chasm, wondering if they had the courage to cross. Inside the house, Eli was finishing his masterpiece, a drawing of a family. A man, a woman, and a boy, all sitting around a kitchen table, all of them smiling. It was more than a sketch. It was a prayer, a child's vision of a future that depended entirely on the courage of the two broken adults sitting on his front porch. The truth came out by accident. A sudden gust of wind through the open window of Mabel's room, a photograph dislodged from her Bible, a fluttering piece of paper landing at Cole's feet. He had come upstairs to fix a squeaky floorboard. He bent to pick it up, and he froze. It was only half a photograph. The other half had been torn away, the edge ragged and violent. It showed a younger Mabel, dressed in silks and pearls, her smile radiant but fragile. Her arm was wrapped around an empty space, a ghost where another person had once stood. "I'm sorry," Cole said, handing it to her. "The wind, it's all right." She took the torn photo, her hand trembling. She sank onto her narrow bed. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth." Cole remained standing, a silent sentinel in the doorway, unsure if he should stay or go. I wasn't entirely honest about my past, she began, her voice gaining a hard, brittle edge. My family wasn't just comfortable. We were wealthy. My father owned half the textile mills in Boston. We lived on Beacon Hill. The confession wasn't a surprise. Her education, her bearing, it all made sense now. But it raised 1,000 new questions. What happened? Her eyes were fixed on the photograph, on the ghost beside her. I fell in love with the wrong man, she said, her voice laced with a bitter poison. Or rather, a man who turned out to be wrong in every way that mattered. The story spilled out. She'd been the belle of Boston society, courted by men who saw only her father's fortune. She had chosen Thomas Whitman, a handsome, charming lawyer with big dreams and empty pockets. She thought it was love. He seemed different, she whispered. He talked about building a better world, about using my family's money to help people. I thought he saw me. But after their engagement, the mask had slipped. He'd pressured her for her inheritance. He'd invested in shady schemes. When she questioned him, the charm turned to manipulation, then to cold, veiled threats. The final straw, she said, her voice hardening, was when I found he'd been forging my signature, securing loans against my name that he never intended to repay. When she confronted him, he'd laughed. He told her no one would believe her. A wife's duty was to trust her husband's judgment. The photograph had been taken at their lavish engagement party. She had torn it in two the night she broke the engagement, the night her world had shattered. The ensuing scandal had ruined her. Thomas, the master manipulator, had painted her as unstable, untrustworthy. Her father, a man who valued his business reputation above all else, had chosen his side. He'd suggested she take an extended trip to the country. Cole felt a hot, white rage build in his chest. Not at Mabel, but at the men who had failed her. So you came west, he said. Not right away, she said, her voice breaking. First came the fever. It took my parents, and my younger brother. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled. By the time I recovered, there was nothing left. The house, the money, it was all gone to pay the debts Thomas had created in my name. I was alone. The torn photograph wasn't just about a broken engagement. It was a symbol of a life utterly demolished. But why are you telling me this now? Cole asked, though a cold dread was already creeping up his spine. Because Jeremiah Blackwood has been in town, she said, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Crawford warned me. He's been asking questions, spreading rumors. She finally looked at him, her eyes wide with a familiar fear. He's telling people that a woman with my background isn't fit company for a respectable man and his son. The pieces clicked into place. Blackwood's interest, his pressure, his veiled threats. He was trying to drive her out, to use her past to destroy her future. He's saying I'm running from something scandalous, she whispered. That proper women don't travel across the country to work as maids. That you should be careful who you allow around Eli. Each word was a poisoned dart, aimed at the fragile sense of peace she had built here. Cole could see how deeply they had cut. He can say what he likes, Cole said, his voice a low growl. It doesn't change who you are, or what you mean to us. But even as he said it, a new, terrible thought began to form. What did she mean to them? To him? Blackwood was forcing him to confront feelings he had buried deep, feelings that were dangerous and complicated and real. That night, the tension in the house was a thick, suffocating blanket. Eli, with his uncanny sensitivity, felt it. Is Mabel going away? He asked suddenly, his small voice cutting through the silence. Why would you think that, son? Cole asked, his heart clenching. She feels sad, Eli said with unnerving certainty. Like when you look at Mama's picture. The observation was so sharp it stole their breath. Mabel reached across the table, her hand covering Eli's. I am sad about some things that happened a long time ago, she said gently. But being here with you and your papa has made me happier than I've been in years. Then why would you go away? Eli pressed. The child's simple, direct question demanded an answer. Mabel looked at Cole, her eyes full of a desperate hope and a weary resignation. She was preparing to run again. "Sometimes people say cruel things," Cole said, choosing his words carefully, for both of them. "But I want you to know this. As long as I have anything to say about it, Mabel will always have a home here." The promise was bigger than he'd intended. It was a declaration, and seeing the relief flood his son's face, and the tears well up in Mabel's eyes, he knew he meant every word. Later that night, Cole walked the perimeter of his property under a canopy of brilliant stars. The torn photograph had changed everything. Mabel had trusted him with her story. But it also raised a dark, unsettling possibility. Was Blackwood's crusade against her really just about gossip and malice? Or was there something else? Something from her past in Boston that had followed her all the way to Wyoming. A man like Blackwood didn't go to this much trouble over a simple rejection. He was hunting her. And Cole was beginning to realize that the reason why was a secret far more dangerous than a broken engagement and a lost fortune. The torn photograph wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The final, most devastating secret was revealed on a Tuesday morning. Mabel was hanging laundry when she simply crumpled to the ground, a pile of white sheets and unspoken sorrows. Cole found her, her face ashen, and carried her into the house. As he laid her on the sofa, a thin silver chain that had been hidden beneath her collar caught on his shirt button. A small, tarnished silver locket swung free. It fell open. Nestled on one side was a tiny, faded photograph. On the other, curled under a piece of glass, was a single, perfect lock of fine, baby blonde hair. Mabel's eyes fluttered open. Her first conscious act was a desperate, panicked gasp as she clawed for the locket. "It's safe," Cole said gently, pressing it into her hand. But it was too late. The secret was out. Her face dissolved into a mask of such profound grief that it made his own losses feel distant and pale. Eli hovered nearby, his small face a mirror of concern for the woman who had become his world. "I should have told you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, each one a testament to an agony he couldn't comprehend. "I should have been honest." "Told me what, Mabel?" The story came out in broken, ragged sobs. Her engagement to Thomas Whitman hadn't just been about love or money. It had been a desperate attempt to avoid scandal. She had been pregnant with his child. "Her name was Grace," Mabel choked out, her fingers caressing the locket. "She lived for 6 days, 6 perfect, beautiful days, before the fever took her." The words hit Cole with the force of a physical blow. A baby. She'd had a baby. The child had been born prematurely, weakened by her mother's stress and shame. Thomas, her charming fiancé, had been absent, dismissive, concerned only with how this tragedy would affect his reputation. "He said it was for the best," she whispered, her voice breaking with the memory of his cruelty. "He said we could start fresh, have legitimate children after we were married. He couldn't understand why I was so broken." The rage that filled Cole's chest was pure and hot. He thought of his own gut-wrenching grief over Sarah and tried to imagine facing it alone, shamed and condemned by the man who should have been her rock. "The fever that took my family came a year later," she finished, her voice hollow. "By then, I'd already broken the engagement. I couldn't marry a man who thought my daughter's life was an inconvenience." Eli, who had been listening with a silent, intense focus, moved to her side. He placed his small hand on her arm, his touch gentle. "She's still your baby," he said with the simple, profound wisdom that was his gift. "Even if you can't see her, Mama is still my mama even though she's in heaven." The child's words reached a place in Mabel's heart that had been frozen for years. She pulled him into a fierce hug, and Cole watched as 2 souls, shattered by loss, found a moment of perfect, shared understanding. The revelation of Grace changed everything. Mabel's boundless patience with Eli, her fierce protectiveness, her intuitive understanding of his silent world, it all snapped into focus. She wasn't just a kind woman. She was a mother, pouring all the love she had for the child she'd lost into the child she had found. "Why didn't you tell me?" Cole asked her that evening on the porch. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice small. "Afraid you'd see me as damaged. An unmarried mother, even a grieving one, wasn't what a man like you would want in your home." Her honesty cut him to the quick. "Grace doesn't make you damaged, Mabel," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer deny. "She makes you precious. Your capacity to love after everything you've been through, it's what makes you extraordinary." The words hung between them, a confession, a promise. They had crossed the bridge, but the revelation of the locket also cast Jeremiah Blackwood's actions in a new, more sinister light. His crusade wasn't just about driving away a woman with a scandalous past. No, it was more personal than that. A cold, horrifying thought began to take root in Cole's mind. What if Blackwood's interest in Mabel wasn't about her at all? What if it was about the man who had wronged her? Could it be possible? Could Thomas Whitman, the monster from her past, have some connection to Jeremiah Blackwood, the devil at their doorstep? The idea seemed insane, a coincidence too great to be believed. But as Cole looked at the vast, dark expanse of Blackwood's ranch, which bordered his own, he knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that there were no coincidences in a place this small. The silver locket had revealed the depth of Mabel's heart. Now, Cole feared it was about to reveal a conspiracy so dark and far-reaching that it would threaten to consume them all. Blackwood didn't just want Mabel gone. He wanted her silenced, forever. The key that unlocked the final, terrifying truth was hidden where it had been for 3 years, inside Sarah's music box. Eli found it. He'd been trying to fix the delicate mechanism, which had started to play off key. His small, nimble fingers felt something tucked beneath the faded velvet lining, a folded piece of paper. "Papa!" he called out, his voice sharp with discovery. "There's something hidden in Mama's box." Cole and Mabel rushed to his room. The paper was yellowed with age, folded into a tight, hard square. As Cole's trembling fingers carefully unfolded it, the formal, legal script seemed to leap off the page. It was a deed, but not just any deed. It was a legal document granting the full and exclusive mineral rights to a 10,000-acre tract of land in the Montana Territory. The date was 1889. The land had been purchased by one Mr. Harrison Quinn of Boston, Massachusetts. "My father," Mabel whispered, her face draining of all color as she read over his shoulder. "He bought mining rights? That's impossible. His business was textiles." Cole's eyes scanned the document, his mind racing. The official seals, the witness signatures, it was legitimate. And the detailed map of the land parcel made his blood run cold. "Mabel," he said, his voice a low, stunned whisper, "this land, it includes almost the entirety of Jeremiah Blackwood's ranch." The truth hit them like a lightning strike, illuminating everything with a horrible, brilliant clarity. Blackwood's interest in their ranch, his relentless pressure, his attempts to discredit Mabel, his venom. It was never about romance. It was never about gossip. It was about this piece of paper. "My father never mentioned this," Mabel said, sinking onto Eli's bed, the world tilting beneath her. But Cole was beginning to understand. The deed was dated shortly after Mabel's engagement to Thomas Whitman. Her father, a shrewd businessman, must have suspected his future son-in-law's treachery. "He was protecting you," Cole realized, his voice filled with awe at the dead man's foresight. "He bought this in secret, an inheritance that snake Whitman could never touch." Somehow, the deed had ended up with Sarah, perhaps through Mrs. Crawford, who handled mail for prominent families. Sarah must have understood its importance and hidden it in the one place no one would ever think to look. Mabel Quinn wasn't a penniless maid. She was the rightful owner of an empire, and Jeremiah Blackwood was a thief. "He's been mining on that land for years," Cole said, the pieces snapping together. "The silver ore that made him rich, The power he wields, the men on his payroll, it's all been stolen from you. But a new, even more terrifying thought followed. What if Blackwood's connection to Thomas Whitman wasn't a coincidence at all? What if they were partners? Whitman, the corrupt lawyer in Boston, could have falsified documents, covered the tracks, made Blackwood's illegal claim look legitimate after Harrison Quinn's death. It was a conspiracy that stretched 1,000 miles, from the drawing rooms of Boston to the dusty plains of Wyoming, and Mabel was standing right in the middle of it. "If Mr. Blackwood finds out we know," Mabel's voice was a terrified whisper. Men had killed for far less. Blackwood's entire life was a lie, built on land that belonged to the woman he was trying to destroy. "We need to get this to a lawyer in Cheyenne," Cole said, his mind already calculating the risks. Someone outside Blackwood's influence. But they were isolated. The nearest federal marshal was 3 days' ride away. The local sheriff was a weak man, easily swayed by Blackwood's money and power. They were on their own. "Does this mean Mabel is rich now?" Eli asked, his innocent question cutting through the thick tension. "Will she still stay here? Rich people live in big houses in the city." The question hung in the air. The deed changed everything. Mabel was no longer a woman in need of rescue. She was a woman of immense power and wealth. She could go anywhere, do anything. Mabel looked at her son, at their son, and then at Cole. "I was rich before," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It didn't make me happy. The things that matter, family, belonging, those can't be bought." But the balance had shifted. Cole had fallen in love with a vulnerable woman he felt compelled to protect. Now, that woman held the power to buy and sell his entire world. What could a simple rancher offer an heiress? As Cole stood under the vast Wyoming sky that night, the answer came to him, clear and pure. Their connection had never been about money or power. It had been forged in shared grief, in quiet understanding, in the healing of broken hearts. The legal document had revealed the true nature of Jeremiah Blackwood's evil, but it had also revealed the depth of their love. And Cole Remington knew he would fight to the death to protect it. He made a decision. He would send word to the federal marshal. But he knew Blackwood wouldn't wait for the law. The moment that thief knew they held the deed, he would come for it. He would come to erase the evidence. He would come to erase them. The battle wasn't coming anymore. It was here. And it was a battle for their lives. The Colt. 45 had sat above the fireplace for 5 years, a silent monument to a life Cole had left behind. It had been his father's, and his grandfather's before that. It had served him well during his time as a territorial deputy, before Sarah's love had convinced him to hang up his badge for good. Now, his hands, steady and sure, took the weapon down. He felt the familiar heavy weight of it. Some fights you couldn't run from. "You're really going to face him?" Hank Morrison asked, his weathered face a mask of concern. He watched Cole expertly clean and load the revolver. "I'm going to protect what's mine," Cole said. The words meant more than just land. They meant Mabel. They meant Eli. They meant the fragile, beautiful life they had started to build. "We sent word to the marshal 3 days ago. If Blackwood was going to be reasonable, he'd have shown up by now." Instead, Blackwood had shown his hand. He'd brought in hired guns, hard-faced men from Cheyenne who wore their pistols tied low and followed orders without question. Cedar Falls was holding its breath, a town caught between a thief and the family that stood in his way. Mabel came out of the kitchen. She was calm, her face a mask of resolve, but Cole could see the fear in her green eyes. "Mrs. Crawford has agreed to take Eli into town," she said. "He'll be safe with her until this is settled." "I don't want to go," Eli said, appearing in the doorway. His small body was rigid with defiance. "This is my home. You're my people." The words, spoken with a gravity far beyond his years, struck Cole to the core. This was Mabel's influence. She had given his son not just a voice, but the courage to use it. Cole knelt, meeting his son's gaze. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is protect the people we love by sending them to safety, he said gently. This isn't about you not being brave. It's about making sure you're here, so we can all be together when it's over. Eli considered this, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. I drew this for you, he said, his voice solemn, in case you forget what you're fighting for. Cole's hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was the drawing from before, the three of them at the kitchen table, their family, whole, happy, safe. This is what I want, Eli said. This is my family. Cole felt tears burn his eyes. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket, a talisman against the coming darkness. We'll get back to this, he promised his son, his voice thick. All of us. As the afternoon bled into evening, help began to arrive. Not hired guns, but neighbors, friends. Mrs. Crawford showed up with women from the church, their faces grim as they started making bandages and boiling water. Doc Peterson arrived with his medical bag. Other ranchers, men who had been squeezed and threatened by Blackwood for years, rode in with rifles across their saddles. Man's been bleeding this territory dry, one of them said. It's time someone stood up to him. But it was Mabel who took Cole's breath away. The gentle, grieving woman was gone. In her place stood a queen readying for war. She had changed into a deep blue riding dress, a remnant of her former life. Her hair was swept up, revealing the proud, aristocratic line of her neck, and her eyes, those beautiful green eyes, held a fire of pure steel. You look ready for battle, Cole told her as they stood on the porch, watching the sun die behind the hills. I'm ready to stop running, she replied. For too long, I have let men like Thomas Whitman and Jeremiah Blackwood write my story. Tonight, that ends. As dusk settled, a rider came with word. Blackwood was on his way, a dozen men with him. They were coming to negotiate. The federal marshal was still a day out, too late to stop the bloodshed. Cole strapped on the gun belt, the leather creaking like a memory. The weight was no longer a burden. It was a responsibility. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the future his son had drawn for them. As the last light faded, he stood with Mabel on the porch. The world was silent, holding its breath. Whatever happens tonight, he said, taking her hand, I want you to know. These months with you, they've given me back my son. They've given me back my heart. She squeezed his hand, her touch strong and sure. And you, Cole Remington, have given me back my faith, she said. Whatever comes, we face it together. Then in the distance they heard it, the faint rhythmic thunder of approaching hooves. The time for words was over. The battle for their future was about to begin. The church bell began to toll just after midnight. It was the signal. Mrs. Crawford's promised alarm. Its urgent, clanging voice echoed across the dark prairie, a bronze cry of warning. Cole counted the tolls. 12. Blackwood was coming with his whole army. Remember, Cole called out to the grim-faced ranchers positioned around the house. We hold our fire. Let them make the first move. From the front window, Mabel watched a line of torches snake across the darkness, a fiery serpent coming to devour them. It was a show of force, an act of intimidation. The riders pulled up just outside the ring of light from the ranch house lamps. Jeremiah Blackwood sat on his black stallion, arrogant and sure. Behind him, his 12 hired guns were dark silhouettes of casual violence. Cole Remington, Blackwood's voice boomed, falsely jovial. I believe we have some business to discuss. Cole stepped onto the porch. The Colt felt cold and heavy at his side. He could feel the paper of Eli's drawing against his chest. I believe we do, Blackwood, though I'm not sure it requires this much company. Insurance, my friend. Blackwood's smile was a slash of white in the torchlight. I understand you found some interesting paperwork. This was it, the moment of truth. If you mean the deed that proves my fiancé owns the mineral rights to your entire illegal operation, Cole's voice rang out, clear and steady, then yes, we found it. The word, fiancé, hung in the air, a sudden, shocking declaration. He felt more than saw Mabel's sharp intake of breath from the window behind him. Blackwood's charming mask dissolved, his face contorted with pure, murderous rage. "That document is a forgery," he snarled. "The federal marshal doesn't seem to think so," Cole shot back, pressing his advantage. "He'll be very interested to examine your fraudulent claims when he arrives tomorrow." The mention of the marshal sent a ripple of unease through the hired guns. They were bullies, not outlaws. A fight with a rancher was one thing. A fight with the United States government was another. "Stand down, Blackwood!" A new voice cut through the tension. Sheriff Patterson stepped out from behind the barn, his own pistol drawn. "This has gone far enough." Relief washed over Cole. The law had finally arrived. But Patterson didn't walk toward Blackwood. He walked toward the porch, and his gun wasn't pointed at the hired guns. It was pointed directly at Cole. "Drop the weapon, Remington," the sheriff said, his voice flat and dead. "I've got a warrant here for your arrest. Assault. Threats of violence against Mr. Blackwood. Betrayal." It was a cold, sharp knife in the gut. The sheriff was on Blackwood's payroll. They hadn't been isolated. They had been trapped. Blackwood let out a roar of triumphant laughter. "You see, Remington? This is my territory. The law does what I say." It was over. Everything was lost. The ranchers who had come to help were now facing down the law itself. They were frozen, uncertain. Cole's mind raced. He could feel Eli's drawing. He saw his son's face. He saw Mabel's. He would not surrender them to this monster. But what could he do? And then the church bell began to toll again. But this time, the rhythm was different. It wasn't the panicked alarm. It was a steady, powerful, rolling peal. A sound of victory, a sound of arrival. Everyone froze. Blackwood's smug laughter died in his throat. Over the rise, a new group of riders appeared. They weren't ranchers. They weren't hired guns. They were disciplined, uniformed men in federal blue, their rifles held at the ready. At their head was a grizzled, stone-faced man with a silver star pinned to his chest. "Jeremiah Blackwood," the man's voice cracked like a whip. "U.S. Marshal Thompson, you and Sheriff Patterson are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of federal mineral resources." The world turned upside down in an instant. The hired guns, seeing the federal deputies, threw down their weapons as one. This was a fight they could not win. Blackwood, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, seemed to snap. As Marshal Thompson approached with shackles, the defeated tyrant made one last, desperate move. He clawed for his gun. A single shot exploded in the night. Blackwood crumpled, falling from his saddle, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. "Should have surrendered peacefully," Marshal Thompson said calmly, smoke curling from the barrel of his revolver. As Blackwood was hauled away, a groaning, bleeding wreck, Cole felt the tension of 100 lifetimes drain out of him. He turned. Mabel was standing in the doorway, her father's deed pinned to her dress like a medal of honor. The word he had spoken, fiancé, still hung between them, no longer a tactic, but a question. The bronze voice of the church bell had fallen silent. In the sudden quiet, under the vast Wyoming sky, a new life was waiting to begin. As the first light of dawn painted the sky rose and gold, Cole and Mabel stood alone on the porch. The storm had passed. The silence that remained was filled with unspoken things. "Did you mean it?" Mabel asked softly, her fingers tracing the deed on her dress. "What you said? About us?" Cole's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the real moment of truth. "I meant it," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I know I should have courted you properly. I know I should have asked. Cole." She stopped him, her voice gentle. She placed a hand on his cheek, turning his face to hers. Tears glistened in her green eyes, tears of joy. "I've been waiting for you to ask," she whispered. Before he could answer, the front door burst open. Eli, having escaped Mrs. Crawford's watch, flew onto the porch, his face alight with a desperate, hopeful energy. "Is it over? Are we safe?" Are we really going to be a family? Cole knelt, pulling the creased drawing from his pocket. He showed it to his son. Is this still what you want? Eli looked from the drawing to Mabel, his expression solemn. Mabel, he said, with all the formality his 8 years could muster, would you like to be my new mama? The question shattered Mabel's composure. She sank to her knees and pulled Eli into her arms, holding him with a fierce love that was both a memory of the child she'd lost and a promise to the one she'd found. Oh, my sweet boy, she sobbed against his hair. I would be honored to be your mama. There's just one thing, she said, pulling back to look at Cole, a playful, brilliant light dancing in her eyes. If we're going to be a proper family, someone needs to ask me properly. Cole rose, his heart so full he could barely breathe. He took her hand. Mabel Quinn, he said, his voice shaking. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a life with me and this remarkable boy? Yes, she said simply, the word a perfect, shining thing. Yes, to all of it. The kiss they shared was witnessed only by the rising sun and a small boy who immediately pulled out his charcoal and began to sketch. What are you drawing now? Mabel asked, laughing through her tears. Eli held it up. It was a new family portrait. The 3 of them, holding hands. But this time, there was someone else. Floating above them, a ghostly, beautiful figure with flowing hair and gentle, smiling eyes, a guardian angel. Mama Sarah wants us to be happy, Eli explained with matter-of-fact certainty. She told me in a dream. She picked you special, just for us. Cole looked at the drawing, at the woman he loved, at the son he had gotten back from the brink of silence. He saw his past and his future, not at odds, but in perfect, beautiful harmony. 6 months later, the first snow of winter fell on the Remington ranch. Inside the warm kitchen, Mabel, her belly swollen with new life, watched Cole teach Eli how to play chess. The deed had made them wealthy, but they had used the money to rebuild their community, funding the school, helping families ruined by Blackwood's greed. Their real treasure wasn't the silver in the ground, but the love that filled their home. Cole gave Mabel a small box. Inside was a new gold locket. It already held 2 pictures, one of him and one of Eli. For the new memories, he said. There's room for more, Eli pointed out. For the baby. Mabel fastened the locket around her neck, her heart overflowing. That night, the 3 of them stood on the porch, watching the stars blaze in the cold, clear sky. They were no longer a collection of broken pieces. They were a family, whole, strong, forged in the fires of sorrow and loss, and made unbreakable by a love that had proven itself stronger than any darkness. The Wyoming wind whispered through the trees, carrying not threats, but a lullaby, a promise of all the peaceful, happy years to come. If this story of love and justice in the Old West touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button. The tale I have for you tomorrow is one you will not want to miss.